In 1921, 5 people landed on a frozen island 140 kilometers off the coast of Siberia. 4 of them were men in their 20s, eager for adventure and glory. The 5th was a 23-year-old woman who had never fired a gun, never skinned an animal, never spent a night outdoors. She was there to sew. 2 years later, a rescue ship arrived. She was the only one still breathing. Ada Blackjack did not ask for this story. She did not want to become a symbol of survival or a newspaper headline. She wanted $50 a month so she could get her sick son out of an orphanage. What she got instead was 704 days on one of the most isolated landmasses on Earth, watching men die, teaching herself to hunt, and fighting off the animals she feared most in the world: polar bears. This is not a story about heroism. It is a story about a mother who refused to die. Ada Blackjack. The name was not hers by birth. She was born Ada Delatuck in 1898, in a settlement called Spruce Creek, about 13 kilometers from Solomon, Alaska. Her father died of food poisoning when she was 8 years old. Her mother, unable to care for her, sent Ada and her sister to a Methodist mission school in Nome. Her Inupiaq name, the one spoken by her family in the language of her ancestors, was never written down. The missionaries who raised her taught her to read English, to cook Western food, to sew Western clothes. They did not teach her to hunt. They did not teach her to trap. They did not teach her to survive on the land her people had occupied for thousands of years. What we know about Ada is this: she was small, barely 5 feet tall. She was quiet. She was afraid of the cold, afraid of the dark, and absolutely terrified of polar bears. At 16, she married a dog musher named Jack Blackjack. The marriage was bad. He drank. He hit her. She had 3 children. 2 of them died as infants. In 1921, Jack abandoned Ada and her surviving son Bennett on the Seward Peninsula, a remote stretch of land far from any town. She was 22 years old. She had no money. Her 5-year-old son was sick with tuberculosis. Ada picked up her child and walked 40 miles through the Alaskan wilderness, back to Nome. When Bennett was too tired to walk, she carried him. In Nome, she could not find steady work. The sewing jobs paid almost nothing. Bennett's condition worsened. She made the hardest decision of her life. She placed him in an orphanage, promising that she would earn enough money to bring him home and pay for proper treatment. That was when she heard about the expedition to Wrangel Island. Wrangel Island lies in the Arctic Ocean, roughly 140 kilometers north of the Siberian coast. The island is about 125 kilometers long and 80 kilometers wide. The climate is severe polar. Temperatures stay below freezing for 10 months of the year. In winter, the sun disappears entirely for 61 days. Wind speeds regularly hit 140 kilometers per hour. There are no trees. The landscape is tundra, moss, lichen, and low scrub plants that flower for about 2 weeks in summer before the cold returns. But the waters around Wrangel are rich with life. Seals, walruses, and whales pass through. The island has the highest concentration of polar bear dens anywhere on Earth. Scientists estimate that 300 to 400 mother bears give birth there each year. The Chukchi people, who lived on the Siberian mainland, called it Umkalar, which translates to Island of Polar Bears. They did not live there permanently. They understood what the island was. In 1914, survivors of a Canadian ship called the Karluk were stranded on Wrangel for 8 months after their vessel was crushed in the ice pack. 11 people died. That disaster was organized by a man named Vilhjalmur Stefansson. 7 years later, Stefansson would send Ada Blackjack to the same island. Vilhjalmur Stefansson was born in Manitoba in 1879 to Icelandic immigrants. He became one of the most famous Arctic explorers of the early 20th century. He was also, depending on which historian you consult, either a visionary or a reckless egomaniac. Contemporary accounts paint a complicated picture. Stefansson spent years living among the Inuit, learning their language and survival techniques. He wrote popular books arguing that the Arctic was not a frozen wasteland but a friendly place where Europeans could thrive if they adopted indigenous methods. His book, The Friendly Arctic, became a bestseller. But his expeditions had a troubling pattern. The Karluk disaster killed 11 people. His 1913 to 1918 Canadian Arctic expedition lost 17 members total. Fellow explorer Roald Amundsen called him irresponsible. Members of his own teams accused him of abandoning them when conditions turned dangerous. In 1921, Stephenson had a new plan. He wanted to claim Wrangel Island for Canada, or perhaps Britain. Neither government had authorized this. Neither government wanted the island. The Soviet Union had already claimed it. Stephenson went ahead anyway. He recruited 4 young men. Alan Crawford, a 20-year-old Canadian who would serve as nominal leader. Lorne Knight, 28, an American who had worked on previous Stephenson expeditions. Fred Maurer, also 28, who had survived the Karluk disaster and should have known better than to return. Milton Gall, just 19 years old, a college student from Texas looking for adventure. Stephenson gave them 6 months of supplies. He assured them the island was full of game. He told them a relief ship would arrive within a year. He also told them to hire indigenous Alaskans with hunting experience. Several families agreed to join. Then, one by one, they backed out. Sources conflict on exactly why. Some accounts suggest they heard about the Karluk and wanted no part of Stephenson's plans. Others indicate they were simply unavailable at the last moment. On September 9, 1921, when the ship Silver Wave prepared to depart, only one indigenous person stood on the dock. Ada Blackjack. She had been promised $50 per month to serve as seamstress and cook. She had been told other Inupiaq families would join them. She had been assured she would not have to do the difficult work of Arctic survival. She almost turned back. According to her diary, which is now held at Dartmouth College, she had serious doubts about living on an island with 4 white men she did not know. But Bennett was in the orphanage. His tuberculosis was getting worse. $50 a month could change everything. Ada boarded the ship with 4 men and a black and white cat named Victoria. Vic for short. They landed on Wrangel Island on September 15, 1921. The men raised a British flag, though Britain had neither requested nor authorized this. They established a camp on the island's southern coast, near what they called Doubtful Harbor. For the first year, conditions were tolerable. The men hunted seals, trapped foxes, shot the occasional polar bear. Ada sewed warm clothing, mended gear, and prepared meals. The diary entries from this period, according to Jennifer Niven's account based on primary sources, show moments of optimism. But there were problems from the start. Ada struggled with isolation and the constant fear of bears. According to Lorne Knight's diary, dated November 23, 1921, the relationship between Ada and the men deteriorated. Knight wrote that Ada had refused to patch his boots and that he had tied her to a flagpole until she agreed to work. Historians still debate whether this was meant literally or as a bitter joke. Either way, it reveals the power dynamics at play. Summer came. The ice broke. The men watched the horizon for the relief ship Stephenson had promised. It never came. The ship Teddy Bear had been chartered for the resupply mission. It got within visual range of Wrangel Island but could not break through the pack ice. The captain turned back. No one on the island knew this. They only knew that August passed, then September, then October, and no ship appeared. By November, the sun disappeared below the horizon. It would not rise again until late January. The men rationed the remaining supplies and hunted desperately, but game had become scarce. The seals and walruses that had been plentiful the previous year had moved elsewhere. The polar bears were still around, but hunting them was dangerous and the meat could not sustain 5 people through an Arctic winter. By January 1923, they were starving. Let me explain exactly what starvation does to a human body in Arctic conditions. First, the body burns through its glycogen reserves within about 24 hours. Then it begins breaking down fat tissue for fuel. In extreme cold, this process accelerates because the body requires far more calories just to maintain core temperature. A person in sub-zero conditions can burn 4,000 to 6,000 calories per day doing nothing but staying warm. When fat reserves are depleted, the body turns to muscle tissue. This is when cognitive function begins to decline. Decision-making becomes impaired. Tempers shorten. Physical coordination deteriorates. Lorne Knight was also developing scurvy. Without vitamin C, the body cannot produce collagen. The connective tissue holding bones, skin, and blood vessels together begins to fail. Gums bleed. Old wounds reopen. Purple spots appear on the skin. In advanced stages, victims can die from internal hemorrhaging. By mid-January, Knight was bedridden. The other three men, Crawford, Maurer, and Gall, made a decision. They would cross the frozen Chukchi Sea to Siberia, a distance of roughly 140 kilometers, and try to reach the mainland to summon help. On January 28, 1923, they packed supplies onto a dog sled and headed out across the ice. They were never seen again. Ada Blackjack was now alone with a dying man. Knight could not leave his bed. He was too weak to stand, too sick to hunt, too far gone to help in any meaningful way. Ada had to do everything. Gather firewood, check the traps, prepare food, empty Knight's bedpan, heat sand and place it on his swollen feet to ease the pain. She also had to learn to shoot. Ada had never fired a gun before arriving on Wrangel Island. She was afraid of the recoil. She was afraid of the noise. She was especially afraid of what she might have to shoot at. The polar bears that roamed the island in numbers nowhere else on Earth could match. But with Knight unable to hunt and the men gone, she had no choice. Her diary entry from May 21, 1923 records her first successful shot. I was over to the traps today, nothing but raven track, and I shoot a shotgun one time. I took empty T-tin and shot it. I shot right in it. That's pretty good for first-time shooting. And I cleaned both shotguns. She taught herself through trial and error. She set traps for foxes. She collected bird eggs when spring arrived. She shot at seals, though most escaped into the water before she could retrieve them. Modern survival experts estimate that learning to hunt effectively in Arctic conditions typically requires years of training under experienced mentors. Ada had a few months and a book Knight had given her. Meanwhile, Knight's condition worsened. The scurvy had progressed to its final stages. He could not eat solid food. His skin was covered with hemorrhagic spots. In his delirium, he blamed Ada for his suffering. According to her diary, he accused her of not doing enough, of failing to provide adequate food, of being responsible for his impending death. She kept working anyway. She kept feeding him what little she could catch. She kept warming sand for his feet and reading to him from the Bible he had given her, with Vic the cat curled beside them. On June 22, 1923, Lorne Knight died. Ada could not move his body. He was too heavy, and she was weakened by her own early-stage scurvy. She did what she could. She stacked wooden boxes around his bed to create a barricade, protecting his remains from the foxes and bears that might try to enter the camp. Then she moved into the storage tent with Vic. She was completely alone now. No other humans within 140 kilometers. No way to contact the outside world. No certainty that anyone was coming to rescue her. The three men who had left for Siberia might have made it. They might send help. Or they might be dead on the ice somewhere between here and the mainland. She did not know. She could not know. What she knew was this: Bennett was still in that orphanage. He was still sick. He was still waiting for his mother. "I must stay alive," she wrote in her diary. "I will live." Modern psychology research on isolation indicates that complete solitude typically causes measurable cognitive decline within weeks. Extended isolation leads to hallucinations, paranoid thinking, and what psychologists call derealization, the sense that the world is not real. Historical cases of isolated survival lasting more than a few months almost always involve two or more people. Solo survival for extended periods is exceptionally rare. Ada developed strategies. She established strict routines. She talked to Vic constantly. She kept a detailed diary, writing down the weather, her activities, and her thoughts about Bennett. She set goals for herself. Catch one fox today, collect eggs tomorrow, reinforce the tent walls before the next storm. She built herself an observation platform on top of the storage tent, a wooden structure from which she could watch for ships on the horizon and spot approaching polar bears. On multiple occasions, bears came close to camp. Ada scared them off by banging pots, firing warning shots, and simply standing her ground. The woman who had been terrified of polar bears learned to face them down. After Knight's death, Ada realized she needed better hunting capabilities. Using materials from around the camp, she built herself a small boat, and Umiak, the skin-covered vessel traditional to Arctic peoples. She also made herself new clothing. Her original garments were wearing out, and the cold on Wrangel could kill in hours without proper protection. Using reindeer skins from the EXP, the irony is substantial. Ada had not been raised with traditional Inupiaq skills. The Methodist missionaries had deliberately separated her from that knowledge. Yet here, starving on an Arctic island, she was reconstructing techniques her ancestors had used for generations. She stretched seal skins over a wooden frame. She used sinew for thread. She waterproofed the seams with fat. The boat was not pretty, but it floated. She used it to hunt seals in the shallows and to collect bird eggs from offshore rocks. Addition supplies, she sewed a parka, boots, and mittens. According to accounts from her rescuers, the craftsmanship was excellent. June passed, then July. The days were long now, with the midnight sun providing nearly 24 hours of light. Ada hunted constantly, building up a store of preserved meat for the winter that might come if no ship arrived. She shot her first seal. She killed foxes in her traps. She collected enough food to survive, though her diet lacked the vitamin C necessary to fully reverse her scurvy symptoms. She also made a pair of moccasins for Bennett. Tiny leather shoes, carefully stitched, waiting for the boy she had not seen in 2 years. On August 19, 1923, Ada woke to a sound she did not immediately recognize. She climbed to her observation platform and looked toward the sea. A ship. She ran down to the beach. After 704 days on Wrangel Island, after watching 4 men die or disappear, after teaching herself to hunt and trap and build boats and face down polar bears, Ada Blackjack ran toward rescue. The ship was the Donaldson, chartered by Harold Noyce, an associate of Stephenson. The crew had expected to find 5 people waiting on the beach. What they found was one small woman in a reindeer parka she had sewn herself, carrying a black and white cat. Blackjack, one crew member later wrote, mastered her environment so far that it seems likely she could have lived there another year. Ada did not feel like celebrating. Her first question to Noyce was about the 3 men who had left for Siberia. Had they made it? Had anyone heard from them? Noyce shook his head. Crawford, Maurer, and Gal had never been seen. They had died somewhere on the ice, their bodies never recovered. Ada was the sole survivor of the 1921 Wrangel Island expedition. The ship brought Ada back to Nome in early September 1923. Bennett was still there. He was still alive. Ada had earned enough from her expedition salary, though Stephenson paid her less than originally promised, to take her son to Seattle for tuberculosis treatment. The press descended immediately. Newspapers called her the female Robinson Crusoe. They wrote stories about her courage, her resourcefulness, her triumph over impossible odds. Most of these stories were invented by reporters who never spoke to Ada herself. She hated the attention. She refused interviews whenever possible. When Harold Noyce published accusations that she had caused Knight's death by failing to provide adequate care, claims he later retracted after other expedition diaries proved his accusations false, she was forced to speak publicly in her own defense. It was one of the only times she did so. Stephenson wrote a book about the expedition called The Adventure of Wrangel Island. He made substantial money from it. Ada received nothing. Although she had been promised royalties, the payment never came. She returned to Alaska. She remarried, had another son named Billy, and eventually divorced again. For most of her remaining decades, she lived in poverty, taking odd jobs and moving between small Alaskan towns. She avoided fame. When researchers came to interview her about her survival, she often turned them away. Ada Blackjack died on May 29, 1983, in a state retirement home in Palmer, Alaska. She was 85 years old. Her gravestone includes a plaque that reads, Harrowing, Wrangel Island Expedition. There is a version of this story where Ada Blackjack is a triumphant hero, a symbol of human resilience and the indomitable will to survive. That version makes for good headlines and inspirational posters. The truth is more uncomfortable. Ada Blackjack survived because a reckless celebrity explorer sent unprepared people to a dangerous place with inadequate supplies and no reliable rescue plan. She survived because the indigenous families with actual Arctic skills recognized the danger and refused to go. She survived because she had no choice. Her son was sick, and $50 a month was more money than she could earn any other way. She did not seek this ordeal. It was imposed on her by poverty, by colonialism, by the missionary education that separated her from her people's knowledge, and by a man who saw the Arctic as a stage for personal glory. That she endured says less about heroism than about desperation. Ada Blackjack chose to live one decision at a time, one fox trap at a time, one frightening encounter with a polar bear at a time. She did this not because she was brave. She was terrified nearly every day, but because Bennett needed her to come home. Her diary, now digitized and available through Dartmouth College's collections, contains her own summary of what motivated her. I don't think I could have pulled through if it hadn't been for thoughts of my little boy at home. I had to live for him. Vilhjalmur Stefansson died in 1962, celebrated in many quarters as a pioneering Arctic expert. Ada Blackjack outlived him by 21 years, largely forgotten except by historians and the descendants of those who died on Wrangel Island. In 2003, author Jennifer Niven published a full biography based on Ada's diaries and other primary sources. It was the first comprehensive account written from her own perspective rather than Stefansson's. The island itself is now a Russian nature preserve, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Woolly mammoths survived there until about 4,000 years ago, thousands of years after they went extinct everywhere else. Ada Blackjack's story asks uncomfortable questions about who we call heroes and who we call victims, about whose voices get preserved and whose get erased, about what we owe to the people we send into danger and what happens when we fail them. She wanted to be a seamstress. She wanted to earn money for her sick child. She ended up teaching herself to survive in one of the harshest environments on Earth, alone, for 2 months after the last of her companions died. She did not want to be remembered for this, but we remember her anyway. Not as an inspiration, but as a warning about the cost of other people's ambitions. If this story challenges how you see history, consider supporting the channel. Subscribe and share with someone who values true accounts of survival.